the hell I'm talking about.
Hello and welcome to the special meeting of the CAC. Not a huge crowd, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead anyway. John Zepien has something to say.
Yeah, I just want to bring this to your attention. Today being another day of infamy, 9/11, could we take just a moment of silence and silent prayer, if you would, in remembrance of those that lost their lives 17 years ago today. May they rest in peace.
Okay. Anybody other bits of business? Let me just, before we get started, I'll go ahead and pass out the, we're just getting started, so
Thanks,
we'll
yeah.
go around and.
Do you have the agenda? I didn't see.
There's not an agenda, they're just gonna be doing their own thing, but this is the beginning of, this is a draft flyer for the event. So everyone should have, see, I'll get them passed out. We now have 4 events scheduled next week and the following week with Brad Buchanan for the community to give input and hear from Brad. That flyer is here, it says draft on the top, because if anyone has any comments about the flyer, feel free to share those with me after the event and we can edit it accordingly. So let's just go ahead and quickly go around the room. We'll start down at this end and then we'll go around for quick introductions.
Tina Martinez, Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
John Sapien, Globeville.
Ann Elizabeth, Globeville, etc.
Julie Steen, I'm part with CIG, part of the placemaking team. Lucy here to watch.
Hi, Brad Dotson, Deputy Director for the Mayor's Office at the National Western Center. The other Brad. Bradley, I think I'm not named.
Liliana Flores Amaro, here representing the neighborhoods.
Juan Veloz, de Lidia y Swansea.
Slavica Bartwig, Focus Points.
Dave Oletsky, Globeville.
Angie Holzbus with MIG and the placemaking team.
Jay Rankins with MIG, leading the placemaking team.
Sorry.
Michael with Clayton Electric.
Perfect. Okay, so at this point, I think we'll turn it over to Jay, and he can start the placemaking work session. All
Okay.
you.
Well, thanks everybody, those of you who were able to make it this evening. I know that we've been asking a lot, and so maybe it's something we were with Liz on in sort of our timing and spacing the meetings, because this is one of our lower turnouts that I've seen. So, we have some interesting stuff to discuss tonight. I don't think it needs to go till 7:30. If we have that much conversation, fantastic, but I think we can probably wrap up sooner than that. So what we basically wanted to cover, oh, and let me also point out, Eric Anderson, I think is missing his first CAC meeting in quite a long time. He's up in Canada. He's on vacation this week, so we're really excited for him. He's up in Banff having fun with his family.
But I have a request that he has to go to at least one commode and put on that the American flag should have been in the production of First Man that Canadian actor is in, planting it on the moon.
Always
For those of you that don't know.
Got it. And recorded and noted. There we go.
Great.
We'll send him an email.
All right. At the last 2 times we met, we've actually talked about the user experience survey. So we wanted to give you a little preview on what that document is going to look like. We actually hope to distribute that prior to our next meeting together. And then for those of you who have not filled out the user experience questionnaire yet, we've only received 2 hard copies back. We actually brought hard copies with pens along again. So if you want to fill that out as we're kind of talking and discussing, feel free to do so. Or if you did bring it back, you can give it to Angie or myself, and we'll make sure that that gets incorporated into the overall feedback. We're then going to go into the public realm design. And we're going to focus on streetscapes and on plazas this evening. So if you remember, about a month ago, we actually talked about the riverfront. Some news there is that we're waiting on some analysis that may actually reduce the size of the water quality requirements. We're not sure yet, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. So we're waiting on doing revised concepts or concept until we receive that news. So hopefully by the next time we see you, we have that information and we're able to share with you a new concept for the riverfront that incorporates all the feedback that you provided. And sort of integrating all those different stories, a more naturalized environment, thinking about the riverfront was historically, more educational, interpretive opportunities, so on and so forth. So, why don't we jump in? So the user experience report update. So those of you who have not been at those previous meetings, the goal here is to really understand how people will use the site in the future. So some of that is informed by how people use the current site and the current users. But as you know, the vision and mission for the National Western Center is much broader than the current stock show operations. And so while that's informing some of it, we're also talking to CSU, K through 12 users, teachers, students. We're talking to families, neighborhood members, and really trying to understand, like, communicating as best we can what the campus is going to be like. Without some of those pretty pictures that we'll have come November, December timeframe. But really sort of letting them know the scale, letting them know the uses, the different ways to get around, and then listening from them how they would like to use the campus moving forward. And so in some cases it's simply having a place to grab a bite to eat. If you're an employee on the site and you come here 5 days a week, 50, 51 weeks out of the year, where are you, if you want to have lunch outside, where are you going to go sit down? And then in other cases, people are really focused on how do I get to and from the RTD station. In other cases, it's thinking about, could we do a farmer's market on the site or other types of events? And so we're getting a lot of additional input beyond just the original programming kind of brainstorming that had happened at the CAC level, the community level, and beyond. It's a 4-step process, so we've already identified the user groups. We're doing the interviews and information gathering. The analysis and findings kind of development is actually in progress as we're going. And then there'll be the final recommendations coming out of that that'll help to inform then the designs, conceptual designs, but maybe more importantly even, the design guidelines and standards for the different spaces to ensure that we're actually providing these needs for the different users. So I tried to remember this list. I didn't do a very good job. So we're talking about visitors and patrons, K through 12, students that are not in K through 12, exhibitors, employees, residents, both nearby and regionally. The CAC, you guys have the survey or the questionnaire opportunity, and then businesses and property owners nearby. So I don't know how this is showing up on here. Oh, fairly well. So this is a sample of 2 pages of how we're planning on laying out this document. So it is taking all the input from dozens and dozens of people who are responding to interviews and questionnaires and things to start to create some profiles, quote unquote, of some different types of users on the campus. So this particular example is a permanent employee on the campus. And so it'll include things about when permanent employees would be on the site throughout the week, times of day that they would be on the site. We're going to do some interesting things then comparing all of those different types of users. And are there times that the site is, we would call it sort of in planning and design, like kind of dead, right? Like, so there's not a lot of people around. So you can think about that for the current site when there's not an event going on. pretty much it's only the existing employees that are hanging around. And so are there ways to fill that with other uses? Whether, if it's not in phase 1 and 2, could that happen in the future phases where we start to think about complementary uses to start to fill some of those times? But then, importantly, how people are getting around, what are the amenities that they want to use, and what types of things would attract them to stay on site if they're maybe one of those regular employees, or to come to the site if they're a neighborhood resident. So that's the direction that we're headed. This is another example of an event operator and sort of how they would access the site, the parts of the site that they would use most frequently. Thinking about, again, the times of day, so probably weekend, maybe Thursday or Friday for a setup, do a vote in, vote out, those types of things. And then also thinking about how they're getting to the campus too. So all the different users, is it on foot, by bike, by transit, shuttle, by car, semi potentially. So the finding summary will include all of that kind of overlaid together to give us more information about how we anticipate the site being used. And again, I think it does two things. It informs the conceptual design and at least programming recommendations we're able to make to the authority. But then, and the design guidelines as a part of that. But then two, it helps us identify gaps in areas that have less purpose, maybe even as far as movement throughout the site. Maybe there's gaps in the needs that people have that we're not serving, and are there ways to do that creatively even in the short term? So I'll actually mention that a little bit more in thinking about the streetscape and plaza design as well. And then we'll do, like we've seen in some of the other documents, a finding summary kind of matrix that will kind of encapsulate all that. I'm trying to make this as user-friendly as possible for a variety of audiences. So Angie, for anyone who does not or has not filled one of these out, if you want to raise your hand, she can get one to you as a pen. It'd be great if you could fill it out maybe while we're still here, because we've had a whole lot of luck giving them the people and then asking them to bring them back. So that would be useful. But if you do want to take it with you, that's fine. You can give it to Liz or bring it back to the next meeting. That's fine. Any questions on the point of the user experience piece? Or, yeah, Dave.
I've been wondering, we had talked a couple meetings ago of all the different venues this could be going on at one time, and I think they said maximum the whole campus be able to hold is what, 180,000?
180,000 people?
Is that true?
Probably more if you count. If you didn't, if the yards was not being used for a stock show.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Or parking, yeah, you could fit probably at least 180,000 people.
So, looking at that, I mean, we don't know, this is gonna be world class, and you've got a parking garage with only 1,200 spaces. Do you see the big deficit there? No.
Yes, good point. 80.
Well, if I understand, if memory serves, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, we have a variety of parking and traffic control assessment studies going on. I think one is not completed. One is specifically funded directly related to the National Western Center. And there is conversation, and it's been set forth at the CAC discussions of trying to figure out how to create collaborations with existing parking inventory and future planned parking inventory practically all over the city to combine with multimodal transportation to minimize the number of vehicles that are going to be on this campus. And so that's where the answer to that question is, David, with much credit to you for one of these meetings, when there was any doubt, you raised, why is that parking lot on Betty Cram Drive? I mean, you noticed, so I appreciate this, but I think that needs to be elevated in people's memory that.
Yeah, we can bring Beth and Chris back too.
Well, let's just fine, but let's for right now, let's fix it in people's memory, because there's documents on the websites that talk about this. And there is a problem that has not yet been solved.
Yeah, so on the site proper, if you don't use the yards, there's 1,000 spaces underneath the equestrian center. If you use the yards for parking, maybe it's all indoor events, that's another 2,500 spaces. So 3,500 spaces, but to your point, you could have 100,000 plus people potentially right on the site. So AE is absolutely right that the strategy is
Diffuse.
a little bit looking at future phases, but it's really, to your point, looking at that, capacity around the most immediate area, but also much more broadly, and thinking about how do people shuttle, how do they existing transit to get to the site. Yeah, John.
One of the reasons 6 or 7 years ago that we fought extensively to get a train stop in a locale. And we're pretty fortunate in that we have 3 train stops in close proximity. One's on site and the other's on 38th, and the other one's over on West 38th, 41st actually,
41st and Fox.
off of Fox Street, yeah.
Yeah.
So there'll be interconnecting shuttle system from those 3 stops, and
At least those 3.
yeah, and the thought at that time for here was to get people to take the light rail
Yeah.
and avoid the parking hassle and the traffic hassles of getting in and out. And that was one of the reasons we fought so hard to get a spot along this area here.
Yeah.
So Jay, you say, yeah, there will be at least that. So has that been decided, there will be a shuttle?
Yeah, I mean, for stock show, absolutely. The authority
But
has
what
not
about the
made that
rest
sort of
of the-
decision about year-round.
Yeah.
Right, so.
I
The
mean,
stock
I think,
show will continue to, and Falls actually, they've also commissioned OB to look at both the short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And so they're expanding their shuttle service even this coming year.
so this is when we need it's like Rhino Art District is doing their own study. National Western did a study, there'll be
Yeah,
a
their
mobility
parking.
study of the city. But, what I fear is that all these individual entities are gonna make decisions versus everyone get together and come up with a common solution.
It's cost effective, more cost
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Potentially.
great point.
It
Yeah.
seems to be a difficult
Collaborative
thing.
money.
Yeah, so I don't know, if making this statement right now can
Yeah.
help, because
Yes.
it's important. I mean, we've just moved to Brighton Boulevard, and there's not an easy way for people to get to the train stations, right? They have to
Yeah.
walk,
Yeah.
and that could be bad in the winter. Right now, it's not horrible.
Yeah.
But they're asking, how do we ever get up to the National Western one? That's too long to walk. And RTD needs to be part of the conversation too, because they're somewhat responsible for last mile from their station. So anyway, I just
No, I
hope
think it's a
that
great point, and I don't know the answer,
What?
how far that conversation has gone with other entities, but we can definitely share that with, Stock Show for one, but then OB, who's doing the overall campus study on that as well.
Dave brought up an issue earlier about a concession, correct? And the authority, as soon as we get a director on board, I think that could be very, to me, in my way of thinking anyway, that could be a distinct possibility of part of a community benefits program for neighborhood entrepreneurs to set up a shuttle system.
they
Yeah.
sure could.
And he was talking about a friend with concern. That's certainly an opportunity in the different locations that you alluded to in the beginning there. So those are issues the authority is going to have to deal with, and as soon as we get a director, a CEO on board, I think we can start taking them on and make at least an effort to bring these things in under umbrella.
Yeah, great point. Was there a comment in the back?
She got it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Great. So anyone else who walked in need a user questionnaire, user experience questionnaire, who has not filled one
Or
out?
to be introduced.
Or to be introduced. Yeah, why don't we?
William.
Oh,
You can
well, I'll comment after folks have been introduced.
Oh, okay.
Okay, how about, Larry, you just want to introduce yourself and where
Larry Burgess, property owner on Brighton Boulevard.
Great.
Part of the Business Association.
Perfect.
Jocelyn Hiddle, CSU.
See you.
I'm Heather McNeil. I'm a training director for Colorado Safety Training. We're hoping to provide some services for the construction people, but I'm also a 10-year employee of KM Concessions and Service Systems Associates.
Great. And
Ann Hayes with Westville Company, we're a developer located in Elyria, Swanson.
Mark Rodman, History, Colorado.
great. There we go.
Cool. So that was a short part of the presentation or discussion. So now
Jay,
what we
I
want to
think
do is-
Liliana
oh, I'm
had-
sorry.
I just had a question as a follow-up to the introductions. And I apologize that I missed the last CAC meeting. I had to teach, but did this go out at the last CAC
It's gone out
meeting?
the last two. Yeah.
The last two, okay.
What is
And
it
then
you're
where
looking at?
else? I'm sorry?
What is it you're looking at?
The user experience questionnaire.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
I
it-
couldn't see it.
And then, sorry, and then just wondering what, where it's gone out to, if
That's
you
just
haven't heard a lot.
specifically created for the CAC.
Just for CAC?
Yeah, that questionnaire. There's
Okay.
interviews that we've been doing, sort of focus groups with a lot of other users that I listed up here. All of these folks.
Okay.
But the questionnaire is specifically the tool for the CAC.
And I did send it out as an attachment, as a PDF, but also as a link to an online survey
Survey
too.
monkey
I think.
version.
Yeah.
So if you look in your email and want to do it that way.
Okay, well, okay, I was just wondering what the ease of getting this out to folks and getting it back was.
The participation in the overall interviews and focus groups has been
Yeah.
awesome, like
Okay.
tremendous.
Okay.
So far, we've only had 2 CAC members return their survey. Every question. So.
Okay.
I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
Do you have are you preparing or do you have established a very, very specific list of the focus groups, the numbers of participants, and what their demographics are?
Mm-hmm.
Is that available? And if not, when can we see that?
Yeah.
It exists. We just have to, so Livable Cities is helping us with that portion, so we just need
What?
to get it from Livable Cities is a sub-consultant of
Did you
ours.
say livable cities?
Livable Cities.
Okay, I just,
Sorry.
okay.
Talk
I don't need you
slowly.
to, I don't recommend that we piecemeal it. I'm just saying, this is where you prevent Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
And a lot of
We can
consultants.
include it as an appendix to the report.
Well, I don't want it to be,
Make a lot of
I'm
sense.
asking for it as quickly as possible.
Oh, okay.
And because I feel like that's one of the things that constantly falls through the cracks, is that there's oftentimes, and I'm not saying it is, I just want to, let's up our game a little. That'd be great. Thanks.
Oh, it's, no, we'll distribute. So we'll get that to Liz and then she can distribute to the group. Good question. All right, so the first few things in this are actually review. So for those of you who are in attendance at our last deeper dive session, Dennis Rubo was along with us from Studio Insight, another team member. And so a couple of slides up front here are kind of setting the framework. And then we're actually repeating a couple of the slides from National Western Drive for those people who were not in attendance when we shared those preliminary concepts. The rest of it is new though, diving into Betty Cram Drive and some early concepts for Betty Cram, as well as the sort of the larger interstitial plazas. So the entry plaza from the south, kind of the main space between the barns, that is largely kind of back of house, but we're gonna have a lot of people moving through that space. And then during certain events where maybe there's nothing happening in the interiors of buildings, it could be used as programmable space as well. And then the yards, obviously, which were intended to be in the master plan, our largest, most flexible multi-use space on the campus. So that's the sequence of events here. So what you're seeing on the screen there, you've seen many times now, but on the left is the rendered site plan, an earlier rendering, taking some guesses at some things, and then the site plan on the right. So getting into the streetscape concepts, this was one of those repeat diagrams, but this organizing framework of thinking about how people are generally getting around and what that character is like. And so the squiggly green line, here is obviously kind of the riverfront experience created in the open space. This is the river, the blue line. The color selection is intentional. So what we want to do is, as much as possible, carry that river feel, the river theme, up through or into the campus and through the campus. And so an opportunity potentially along the edge of the yards that we're exploring, connecting to the RTD station. So it may not be water, but the sort of lush planting, shade, green, more cool, softer space than you would experience obviously in the center of the yard. So there may be another sort of passage this way. Looking also between the buildings, animal health, and the equestrian facilities, the arenas. Thinking about this kind of major connection along Betty Cram being this key community corridor. And then obviously what we're talking about is maybe more of a promenade type of experience, which would be those golden colored lines there.
Oh, Anne has a question.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
So I know that there's been a request to consider a way to go through the equestrian building.
Yeah, we're looking at, and I don't have the slide in here, but the last meeting, we showed a dashed line through this space basically. And the idea would be to, at the parking garage level, which would be ground level over here,
Create a way to walk.
create a way to walk through there, and then be able to go upstairs and/or elevator into the central plaza space by the Arm and Admin building. So we have not lost that by any means. This was like the flowy, artsy diagram here.
Okay,
So.
all right.
So I do have a follow-up to hers. How are you going about keeping the cars separate from the livestock? I mean,
Yes.
if you have a horse path adjacent to a parking garage, how are you keeping the well-being of everybody in mind?
Yeah, so the actual public right-of-way would be the magenta color on here, Betty Cram Drive, and then National Western Drive south and north, as well as 51st coming across the bridge. So in this interior space where the animals will be primarily, and as of this moment, it would be entirely in this space. There would not be public, folks driving around. So it'd only be people like with a horse trailer who are coming to equestrian events and things like that, so they'd be used to it. We are exploring with CSU and the Temple Grandin program the potential of adding, and this actually came out, it was one of the suggestions from the CAC, and I don't know if that's how it was sort of stimulated or not, but folks at CSU also are excited about this idea of at least exploring maybe some equestrian pathways in the riverfront. So there is then, a potential that we need to resolve, because the at-grade crossings would be limited kind of down in this section. Because of the river and the floodplain, we can't really look at separated grade crossings, so we'd have to really think about the design of this to ensure that that's really safe. But it would be really neat activation on the riverfront if we could make that happen. So great prompting question. So we're exploring if that can work from a programmatic perspective. And also a water quality perspective would be a concern, but it's a neat idea for sure.
So on the horse pathways,
Yeah.
yay.
Yeah.
And I also just want to make sure though, because sometimes these suggestions come from within the neighborhoods, which this did, especially as presents the possibility of the horse trails being part of the amenities of the parks over in Globeville possibly. I know there's all kind of, but then they get shrunk down to something like just the waterfront, where the footprint of the National Western trumps the full collaboration with the neighborhoods, and this concerns me. So I would just ask that the thinking be expansive, and I know there's lots of things going on.
So we think about this.
Well, there's all kinds of things to talk about it. I think it would be a really great thing to come over to the CAC. So much of it disappears behind closed doors, and it gets constrained by an institutional priority that is valid, but it's not integrated or interwoven with the roots of the inspiration, which comes greatly from within the neighborhoods and conversations that go way back to the neighborhood planning process. So I would just ask that we reset that a little bit, and maybe at the next CAC meeting, bring in some kind of an opportunity to discuss what's realistic and how expansive we can be on that.
Okay. Yeah, great recommendation. I'm taking notes. So just to point out, and I saw several hands, but just to point out, we are working with Sensory, with Parks and Rec. I forget your last. Eats.
She's the
Sensory.
project lead on the Carpio Sanguinetti Park, by the way,
Yep,
which
exactly.
is on the equally important other side of the river.
Yeah.
So when you say riverfront, I really want to, with many other people, I want to start hearing the riverfronts,
Yeah.
plural.
So the
neighborhoods.
Temple Grandin program, which is sort of the stimulus for looking at this idea,
Yeah.
it's very unlikely in the initial conversations with their folks that they would go beyond the riverfront.
Okay.
But the idea is so the reason that we're working with Sensory and with Parks is because we don't want to limit it to just that. And she's really excited about the idea of over this area as well. So what we're looking at is the design of the 51st Street Bridge. We're looking at connectivity of the riverfront to 51st Street, as well as 51st to Carpio Sanguinetti. So it is part of the larger conversation.
Okay, so my request is, and I am being adamant about this because it's a perfect example.
Yeah.
When you're presenting to us, could you please give us the most inclusive picture of what the Temple Grandin is a component of the stimulus. It's not exclusively the stimulus. The stimulus is the larger, more inclusive neighborhood participatory conversation that comes out of the relationships with the National Western Center potential. So it would be much better, in my opinion, for communication purposes to not, and I wouldn't have to say as much in these moments when I don't want to be saying so much. If you said just what you said there as a lead,
Yeah.
and then that a strong motivator and ally and leveraging power that we have among one of our partners is the Temple Grandin the Temple Grandin, is it a program? I can't think. And
Yeah.
I can think of many reasons why the Temple Grandin program would want to stay close to their facilities because of the type of program that is, and it would be a different set of sensitivities and safeties, et cetera.
Yeah.
But please, bring it.
Okay.
Bring the whole thing, because we need, this is only respectful, and it's part of what the heart of it is.
Well, and I think some of the hesitancy is respecting the neighborhood, because if you look at the core of the neighborhood here, you know, these paths would primarily be bicyclists, joggers, people with dogs, and then you have with the Temple Grandin, you have a therapeutic riding environment, you have horse keepers of varying levels that want to be out in nature and enjoying the adjacent flora and fauna, and being respectful of the blend, and then keeping in mind everyone's safety, because a bicyclist in their zone is not thinking about how going by a horse is processed in their brain.
Okay, thank you I hear you, with all due respect, I think that you're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. This is part of the conversation. This is not, in my opinion, the time and the place to dig down into those details. Those are all sensitivities and logistics, and there are many more than that we have to talk about. The first thing, which has been talked about, and I am from within the neighborhoods, most of us here are, the first thing to talk about is the general feeling about, is this among the types of things that people would like to do, and get more input. So I think we've got a tremendous amount of awareness on the National Western Center Citizens Advisory Committee and in the partners about all of those things and more. And I just want things to be framed in the fully participatory sequence that I talked about. And I think that's CSU's mentality. I don't think it's fair to CSU to isolate that, because CSU is a leveraging power to help us with the more expansive peripheral that can to that particular program. So anyway, that's enough said.
Let's get,
Okay,
and then
now,
I'll go over to John.
Okay.
the green, those are, are them catwalks in the air, or are them on the
So
ground?
this is a very, very high-level conceptual diagram. We're going to get to conceptual design. So, no, not necessarily.
I'm just wondering, how wide would they be, because this is a mighty big campus. We're gonna need golf carts or whatever to get people, to and from.
Yeah, I can point out dimensions when we get to the specific spaces.
So now, are you gonna be on that tour with us? you point out a lot of this stuff?
On the 6th of October?
Yes.
Yeah, I can do
What
it.
we're talking about is what does it feel?
I'll wait if you're gonna get to the
Okay.
concepts,
Okay.
we'll get to some specifics.
Yes.
Liberation and constraint. It's very hard to see it under
Next one, I don't know, I'm now leery about these like very conceptual diagrams.
Please don't be that way. Please take it all as constructive for us to gain trust
Sorry,
and
I was just
inspirational.
Trying to make light of these.
Yeah, that makes heavy of it. I want to, I'm making serious of it, but go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the spatial convergence diagram. So in essence, another way to think about the different spaces, the orange space here we're thinking is sort of this large civic spine that could be programmed in a lot of different ways. So Betty Cram obviously is a major civic corridor you saw in the last diagram, but it is still a street. So while yes, it could be closed down on certain occasions, we're creating a large public sort of realm outside of the curb, right, where the cars would be. It's not necessarily the same as having this large civic event space. And so really sort of concentrating that sort of between the buildings. This campus is so flexible though that honestly, I mean, that could happen in the yards, it could happen in parts of the riverfront, obviously tying together with Carpio Sanguinetti, tying together with the other spaces to the south, and then eventually with the campus over to this side. This is just focusing on spaces 1 and 2. Within that though, there's subspaces, and that's one of the things that we're trying to communicate during the last meeting when we were talking about the scale of some of these spaces. So this right here, basically between the 2 large red dots, that's about 4 football fields. So that's an extremely large space. And so we're thinking about how do we humanize that space? How do we break it down? And yes, you have times when there's a lot of semi-trucks in here, loading and unloading, that sort of thing. But we also want times when there's markets and concerts and festivals and things like that. And so how do those actually feel like human spaces? 4 football fields kind of stitched together. And then what we're also showing are these key kind of river junctions again. So they're represented on this diagram again. And then the red dots are what we're seeing as these junctions or pivot points. These really interesting opportunities for in kind of the design sense. But more importantly, I think it's the experience, right? So as you're coming through the space, these are points where multiple places converge, pathways converge, you're coming around a building or through buildings. So they create some really interesting opportunities from a design perspective. So first we're going to look at, and this is repeat for a few of you, so I apologize, but the National Western Drive concepts that we're working on for this portion. And I'm highlighting that particular portion of National Western Drive because it's where 2 different cross sections come together. So again, that's where we're looking at on the campus. It's where 51st Street Bridge comes across. And so these 2 kind of major junction points. One is here, where the bridge is coming across 51st Street. Oh no, that's what you can right there. That's the wrong one. That's the wrong slide, I'm sorry. We'll just use this guy. So this is 51st Street Bridge coming across here. This is the parking garage with the equestrian barn up on top. And then this would be the intersection with the service drive that would come up into the campus between the stockyards and the equestrian barn, leading up to basically the Stockyards Event Center, which again, we think actually has a ton of potential for community use outside of Stock Show, so 50 weeks out of the year. It has basically a black box kind of theater / meeting room, another space with fixed seating, so a lot of potential there. So thinking about these crossings, one was pointed out by Ann, that we want to be able to get across and potentially into the garage as pedestrians, and maybe move through that garage space, pop up into the plaza. And then we also, and it's a necessity even if we can make that happen, because there's going to be times when that garage is closed, right? There's an event, there's vendors down there, lots of expensive equipment, and so we need a good alternative. And so that's this idea of actually coming around this way, and I can jump back to the site diagram. So in essence, it would be coming this way, that first intersection I was talking about, and then this is that second intersection. coming up this way to move through to the pedestrian bridge, to the RTD station, to the rest of the campus, the triangle and beyond. So those two spaces. So in this first concept, and again, this is meant to be review. This is it's a little more urban, I would say, in nature. There's interesting, sort of inspired by the National Western Stock Show Association logo, sort of this here. It's just, again, conceptual, talking about doing some sort of unique paving pattern in the street, having a pretty linear experience with that multi-use pathway, but obviously very green. This is a big water quality opportunities along the roadways and starting actually the riverfront open space kind of experience right along the edge here. It transitions from, and we had a lot of conversation about this at, I think it was either the last meeting or the meeting before, but what is 4 lanes wide, but could be used in a lot of different ways. It could be used as parking on both sides with 1 lane in each direction. It could be used as parking on one side and 3 lanes. You could, maybe some big event gets out, you move everything in the same direction with traffic control on those 4 lanes. So a lot of flexibility, but it does transition to what we're thinking is likely going to be a 3-lane cross section here. Again, with a lot of flexibility, but what that allows you to do in a bigger event situation is either the all directional, or everyone in the same direction, or 1 lane in each direction with a turn lane. So we have a lot of streets like that around Denver. What it allows is that, someone to get by when someone might be queued up to maybe turn into the event space or into the garage. So that's the general idea there. In this second concept, basically this is trying to kind of pull the river theme a little more explicitly into the streetscape, and then potentially up on that service drive and into the plaza spaces. And so you can see that even with the sort of the ground treatment here, kind of suggestive. It's hard to kind of see in here, but the pathway would be more meandering then along there. Not one of those silly ones where you have to sort of dart back and forth constantly, but just a little more kind of flow to it. And then again, the vegetation. One of the things that we took to heart in the last presentation, and we're still working on it, so we're not showing a replacement. But when we showed some of those 3D rendering views, people were really reacting to the edge of the garage and just emphasizing how important it is to have a great treatment on the edge of the garage. One thing, just to reemphasize, in the design guidelines, it's not funded as part of phase 1 and 2, but in the design guidelines, we're going to ensure that that garage is constructed in a way that it can have retail space, office space, other uses potentially added along that edge. So that's a matter of floor to ceiling heights, making sure that structurally sound, making sure that the parking garage can operate if you took, say, 40, 50 feet of the space and converted it to office. So that, I would say, would be our sort of dream kind of vision for how do you activate the edge of a garage. In the short term, though, before that's funded, we want to make sure that that's a really permeable space, that we have safety, kind of visibility. Green wall potential was brought up quite a bit. Maybe we can even grow things on that wall. Public art, not a blank wall, and not a solid wall with just some mosaics and murals on it. So we're steering away. But obviously, art is something we want to integrate, but the rendering showed a solid face to this wall with some kind of mosaics and things. So we're working on revamping those concepts. Any thoughts on National Western Drive? And I know that was a recap, and most of you were at that meeting, so I apologize for that. But just wanted to give you kind of the whole picture at once.
Are you going to do profiles on the streets?
I don't know if that
Not
happened
tonight?
for this one.
What is?
Not for National Western Drive.
Is that the cutaway where you know? Is
Yeah,
that
you
the-
see, I just was curious what their lane widths are.
So it's 12-foot lanes as of right now. We were kind of, when we're still in a conversation, we're sort of angling for a slightly narrower, but we'll see what we can do. One interesting thing with that flexibility, I think most of the time, the outside lanes are going to be parking, actually, or kind of shuttle drop off, that sort of thing. You wouldn't have a 4-lane roadway all the time. And so then that means those also have to be 11 or 12 feet wide. So it ends up being like a 48-foot wide street. So we're looking at this transition point, how can we neck this down? And so the way to do that, this would have to be, if this is a lane some of the time, you can't do a bulb out there, one of those curb extensions to shorten the distance. But you can in this direction, right? Because this is 2 or 3 lanes here. And so this actually shortens it by a whole lane. So the furthest crossing distance would be like 36 feet if we are stuck with 12-foot lanes.
Yeah, it's also a way to slow that traffic down.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also might either.
Sir, we have John going.
I want to say something.
If you raise your hand,
Yeah,
just bring
thanks,
the mic.
John. Go ahead.
A little different. Mickey Zeppelin. Mickey Zeppelin, you know, I've known Mickey for several years, and I really don't know him. Sometimes we have our differences of opinions, which, you know, we're all entitled to. I want to publicly comment and congratulate Mickey's latest effort with the village, what's the name of the little houses?
Tiny homes.
Tiny homes effort. It's a much needed effort, and Mickey's gonna accommodate them in the property he owns at Taxi. And I think it's commendable of him doing so. And in spite of our difference of opinion on some things, I think that's a great thing you're doing, Mickey.
Thank you.
Thank you on behalf.
Thank you, Mickey.
I see the homeless people, and these people are moving out into better housing eventually, are they not?
Actually, not as much in that facility. The concept, the hope is they find a better home, but until they do, they're welcome there. And I guess the unfortunate part, you know, there should be a lot more. I think we're talking less than 15 homes,
Right.
but it's a start, and they plan to do a lot more.
So
Thank you.
we have people like Mickey in our midst, and I think we're blessed to have someone like him here, as well as other folks that are here. So thank you again on behalf of those folks, Mickey. Get back to our business now.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, John. Thank you, Mickey. So our next piece that we're going to look at is Betty Cram Drive. So we talked about it being a civic connector. We've talked about it being the main street kind of through the campus. A lot of different ways it's been characterized. And so we're excited to share some preliminary concepts with you. So this is another one of those kind of urban design diagrams that helps us kind of think through what the purpose of this space is and all the different roles that it plays. So obviously campus arrival is a big one, but it's not the only one. And a lot of times during the week, around the calendar, there may not be an event going on. So this major connection east and west is intentionally shown in red as being just as important as that arrival experience and kind of getting people to the campus. And then we're thinking about the connections of what was a result of the site planning effort that we all went through over the winter and kind of landed on the new site plan. Same program as the master plan, of course, but the revised kind of locations of things. And so the result of that was that we moved a lot of those 365-day-a-year users to this intersection where, intersections, National Western Drive South, National Western Drive North, and Betty Cram meet. And so we have WSSA Legacy Building, we have the Water Resource Building, which I think they're getting close, well, I don't know if they're close to share something, but I know that they're working through concepts to start to change up this placeholder that we had. Of sort of how this would sit on the site. The Livestock Exchange Building, we think likely will be occupied by mostly office users, and so those would be 365-day-a-year users. And then the Animal Health Building, again, a placeholder still in that location. But the point being that the connections between these buildings and sort of this idea of this being a main street of conveying people, but also being a destination, and really working together all these different uses and looking at synergies for research and study and education and interpretation is the inspiration we're trying to take for both Betty Cram as well as when we start to talk about the entry plaza and moving north into the campus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that you mention, yes it is. Now that you mention the crossings, we'll have 2 river crossings.
Correct.
And specifically, when we started the planning effort in Globeville, what, 6 years ago? Drew,
2012.
it's not here tonight. Mickey was there, he's saying, you know, I heard the word connectivity. It was, you know, we lived in isolation, you know, we talked about that. But I think, in talking with other folks around, that the connectivity, it has to be more than just a dam bridge. I think it has to be, I'm very blessed in the way that Uncle Sam allowed me the opportunity to see some of the river crossings in Europe. And I would like this, even though I seen them out of a back end of a 1.5-ton truck, but some beautiful bridges and beautiful river crossings on the Danube River, on the Neckar River, even on the Rhine, you know, some of the tributaries. And of course, they have water galore there at that time. But we have to use the connectivity to what the National Western Center is, what it will be, and what the neighborhoods have been, and what our neighborhoods will be in the future. And it has to be a real demonstration of true connectivity, culturally, socially, economically, and educationally with CSU. If we just have a bridge to move trucks and cars, you know, anybody can do that. We need to have a crossing that exemplifies, and it is true connectivity to everything that we've spent years talking about, planning about, to do these things. So when you get to the design, I think there's going to be a lot of effort as to the type of design and the kind of bridge it's going to be.
Here.
We got 100 years to look forward to, 100 years in the past, and we can't squander an opportunity like we have today in connectivity, to do a real connectivity, not just a physical crossing.
Yeah, extremely well said. The bridges are not in the presentation tonight, but we're hopeful to bring them to you either in our next session, which I guess would be October 6th, or another deep dive in October.
Take your time down the line.
No, we definitely want to. And
Okay.
what we do have right now is 15% engineering drawings, to basically setting sort of heights and figuring out the slopes and that sort of thing. And that's why we wanted to wait until we were able to really think about what are these bridges, not just what's the angle that's necessary to get over the bridge and have the appropriate clearances, but how do we integrate that culture and education, sort of reflective of all the things that you talked about. So we will be bringing that to you, absolutely.
Jay, we have Heather and then Ann.
Okay.
Well, and you slightly touched on my concern is, animal flow, heavy commercial vehicles coming in and out of the property in respectful and quiet fashion for the neighbors is definitely something, I have concerns with. Not a mile from here is a bridge that is the #1 most crashed into bridge in the entire state of Colorado. And it's one that people frequently try to go through to access this property. And a request would be, please, utilize the resources from National Western, get in a commercial vehicle and drive around this property and get some perspective on clearances before you start going, well, an 8-foot road is okay. Not in a semi. Not when there's neighbors nearby that that don't care that there's a concert or a National Western or whatever that is moving in and out because their children have school tomorrow. And to make use of some of those opportunities for a different point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's
So that's
the
part of
bridge?
the user experience component. It's part of OB's work, where they're actually focusing on the semis, and we're doing turning radii analysis. If you've ever seen those, they're super fun and exciting. But to show basically, are we clipping corners? Are we hitting curbs and things like that? And then finally, WSSA, is a partner in all of this work as well. So Paul's not here tonight, but him and his team have been a part of all these conversations too.
So James, I have more of a question. So when someone comes down Betty Cram Drive, you have campus arrival, is kind of a big thing there. But is that a pedestrian arrival point to be able to walk? So when someone's coming down Betty Cram Drive and they want to go to one of these locations, what are they going to encounter as far as if they're in their car? Do they have to go around and park in the parking garage into the equestrian center? Are there going to be some parking availability?
So there's going to be some parking available down in this area.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think CSU's determined where parking would be on these two sites, but there will be some parking on those two sites. There's also the on-street parking along Betty Cram Drive.
Okay.
During a big event, I think that'll probably be used for loading and like
But just general
Ubers and
everyday
lifts and
use.
shuttles, but everyday use, parking along the street.
And so you
And then if all that's filled up, then there'll be signage and wayfinding, and we're actually working on a signage and wayfinding program that we'll bring to the group here shortly. And that would probably direct you to the garage.
So talk a little bit about active uses along that street edge. Like, are any of those uses active uses in the sense that if people are walking down, there's things that they can go into and, so that it's lively on the street edge?
Yeah, Jocelyn, do you mind speaking to CSU since nothing's determined yet, but your thoughts?
Okay. I think, we have heard that request and comment. We want our facilities to provide some of that active feeling as you're walking along Betty Cram. Some of the services that are in the animal health building would be where people are coming and going who are clients of that facility. That's not the same thing exactly, right? That's someone who's already planning on being there. But we would like that to be something that you could maybe go and look in and see activities that are happening within, someone who's doing equine assisted therapy, or maybe you could even see, some of the veterinary work is happening in the small animal clinic. We just have to figure that part out. On the other side of the road, in the Water Resources Center, I think we fully anticipate that the cafe and coffee shop space that we have slated for that building would be along the street. And any educational components that are sort of things that the public can access and come and see, you're just there with your family and you look in and there's something cool to do, you come in and you do it, and it rotates and changes over time. I think we would want that to be visible and activated from the street as well. Sorry, that's kind of a long answer too. Yes.
It's just important.
Yeah, so we've been talking with the various partners. So Paul's not here tonight, I mentioned that. In the Legacy building, they're looking at the configuration as well. Because this building was actually designed, I might have mentioned this during the last meeting. This building designed, it's a super high level concept. You remember when John McNair from Triba came and spoke? Yeah, they actually haven't even updated it since the site plan was revised. So they're excited to kind of get into this and revise this. But the program, regardless of what the building looks like, would have the Coors Art Gallery space, some exhibitry space, some of the artifacts and things from the site, as well as a retail shop on the ground.
All open to the public.
Yep.
Yeah. And then these other buildings, the Exchange building and those more historic buildings, do you know anything about?
Yeah, I don't know the latest on that actually. The last I had heard, they were still assessing whether or not this building could be retained. The centerpiece, because of the damage that had been done through fires and things like that. But these two pieces for sure would be retained, and maybe this one as well. And I don't know about the program of that yet. I don't know if, Brad, is there any discussion with NUCO on?
No, I don't have the latest on that, but you're right. On that center building, there is active remediation going on there. And obviously there is the saloon that's in that building to the west. We anticipate that remaining in place. The saloon is still there, yes.
Yeah, I like this. I think you have a...
I have a question that I think is germane to the last slide too, but it's kind of a general use flexibility, and it does push the limits.
Okay.
But now is the time to do that,
Yeah,
to be
please.
realistic later. With flexibility of use as a 100% goal, can it be such that all of the pathways for special events can be safe for livestock travel and on different scales? I mean, you may not be able to take a championship bull down where we could take a parade of alpacas, for example. But I kind of think it would be sort of nice to think in terms of engineering and amenities and things like that, you know, like water troughs, like pitching posts. I really feel like we've got some potential here, and I think that it factors in at this level for all kinds of reasons. So just as a concept.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I wanted to say regarding the commercial traffic, I want to find out if I'm understanding part of how things are being modeled. It's my understanding that the National Western Center experts at running stock shows are, as CSU is, engaged fully in the conversations in the working group with you guys around the specific, this is a follow-up to your comment, you know, around the specific necessities for keeping the commercial elements of the stock show not exceeding, going to the new capacity that it has to. And so these questions of travel are very, very real, and part of our job in the CAC, which is, I think, is the most important thing in what you said, is to make sure we work to locate some of the specific things that are possible problem points, to make sure they're being, you know, that we do our part to point them out. So I think the most important, I would really ask that you make note of that very specific point of awkwardness. It may be already in the considerations, but you can get a checklist. So anyway, can you talk about that a little bit, how the engineering of the traffic capacity is being elevated?
Yeah, so any site like this is, I guess, extremely challenging from that perspective, because typically what you do is any other intersection, or let's say an area, any other area of town, typically what you would do is the intersections are going to be your pinch points. You do choose some maybe segments in between the intersections as well, and then you model for what the peak traffic is going to be, and then you have to decide what your level of tolerance is for that peak traffic. So typically it's going to be AM peak, PM peak, when most people are driving the kids to school, driving to work, all of that. With the case of a campus like an event campus in particular, it's so variable, and without the authority sort of fully, you know, on board and knowing what all the programs are going to be, it's a bit of guesswork now. So the National Western Stock Show is helpful because it's a humongous event. Paul has mentioned before that it actually has more visitors in a 16-day period than the Winter Olympics does. And so that is it's a pretty peak condition. But if we plan just for that peak condition, we would kind of be doing that thing with shopping malls where they provide enough parking for the day after Thanksgiving. So it's a balancing act. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we plan for all those different scenarios. I think Dave brought up earlier, you know, that you could have multiple events happening at once as well. So I'm sure you have looked at the parking and TDM study. It actually talks about the really big National Western Stock Show Day. The bigger demand actually is when you try to have 4 or 5 events at once, because there's not the same tolerance for, oh, I'm going to, you know, take the train to whatever station, then shuttle in. And so people are expecting to be able to drive to the campus, park on the campus, get close to the building if they want to. So we're using the normal AM, PM peak off day. We're using a single small event. We're using multiple kind of medium-sized events, and then the big event, the stock show, to study all of that. And it's not just how the public is using the streets, but to your point, how are you moving around the campus, and how are those two things, the rub, you know, the constraint is how those two things interact. So, like I said, we can have OV come back also. I'm
Explain
happy
to
to talk
people
about it
what
more
OV is.
tonight, but I think it'd be good if we had the traffic consultant come back and we can dive into this even further.
People understand OV is a company name.
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's not a character, you know,
It's not an oversized vehicle.
It's a,
OV Consulting.
yeah, oversized vehicle.
Please, you know, along those lines that you're talking about, I was watching with interest the Grand Doozy that's going to be held this weekend. And some of the people I talked to over the neighborhood over there, they said, excuse my language, this is what they said, it's going to be a goddamn nightmare. But there's some benefits. I think they're getting $1 off each ticket for the community effort over there. But they have laid out a very distinctive plan for no parking, or very limited parking.
Yep.
With a rather, and I'm gonna see, hopefully it works as they plan it, an elaborate shuttle system and restricted parking areas, and that was one of the big neighborhood concerns about the parking impact on the neighborhood over there. So one of the key issues here, it can be done, and I think we ought to take a good long look at how that ends up over there, aside from everything else that goes on. That will be the proof in the pudding as to what can be done here, because they have limited, in fact, no parking over there. So if they can do it there, it'll be a snap here for us.
Yeah.
With the parking limited as it is.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the architecture, design, feeling on the campus arrival? Looks a little boring to me. I mean, it looks like right at that point there should be a phenomenal sculpture or a herd of cows or whatever, but it's right now when you go to the National Western, you drive up, you have no idea unless you read a sign, but it should be something that really arouses you, something that really says you are here, and I just don't see it in that thing. And the feel, again, that's just a piece of what the arrival entry is in terms of greenery, art, comfort, and I don't know how far along you are on that whole thing, but I think it's critical that we look at that.
Yeah. So these are, as I said earlier, these are placeholder buildings from other models, basically. So we're going to do a deep dive into this space here in a second. What that doesn't show yet is, you know, what CSU is doing with the animal health facility, with the water resources building, and how WSSA and TRIBA will work together to rework this concept. But I completely agree with you. We need to be most concerned about the architectural character. And it has to be a concern everywhere, but I think most concerned here. And it's at the arrival, it's along this community kind of main street, the civic connection we've been talking about. And so we are working on the design guidelines currently. We're actually planning on using, I think it's our October deep dive session, and we're going to be talking about architectural character specifically and getting input on that. But I agree with you, it's not just the buildings either. It's a really important component. The buildings need to be great and provide that gateway type of experience. But it also has to be represented in the hardscape, the plantings, the public art, and the interpretation signage and other elements that we can incorporate there. So we're beginning to show some of that in the next couple of slides. But yeah, Mickey, I think you hit the nose in the, or the, what is it, the nail on the head?
Nail on the head.
Sorry. Just mixing up my saying. Okay. So this one I think is correct. Yes, it is. Okay. So these are the these are the engineering drawings, basically, of Betty Cram Drive right now. We're going to look at images that are much better to look at and kind of understand. But just to point a few things out. So the circles on here are the trees, and so that is actually, it's a big win, honestly, along Betty Graham Drive, given the constrained space that we have to get trees. What we're actually looking at is not just saying, oh, well, we got some trees and we got some canopy there, and that's all good. We want that to be a really great community space and pedestrian space, which means that we need ground level planting as well. So we're looking at bulb outs, we're looking at water quality features, so you'll see that in some of the images. A major one would be here, leading to the riverfront open space and across the Betty Graham Bridge. And then here again, we're creating a pretty large planting area along the street. We'll be working with CSU and with WSSA on appropriate setbacks along here too. So while we want to really, I think when you think of a main street, you often think of zero setback, right? Which means the buildings are right up to the back of the sidewalk. And in, I don't know, in some urban environments that works, where you have a big wide sidewalk and maybe there's parked cars there, and that's not always going to be the case here. We're going to have instances where as wide as we make the sidewalk, it's going to be full of people. And there may not be parked cars because you have loading and unloading and Ubers and Lyfts and shuttles and things coming. And so we want to think about what is an appropriate setback where it is engaging and it is an active ground floor, but it's not necessarily right up on the sidewalk. And I think that different partners are interested in that as well because they want to do things on the site where they're kind of demonstrating best practices and things. So that's an element of what we're looking at. This is the intersection where we had that grand entry here. So this is National Western Drive South here. One of the things to note is as we're transitioning towards the Marion Underpass, where we go under the railroad, there is a kind of a narrowing here. So we're looking at how does, sorry to be off the image, but as that narrows, and this would be the livestock exchange building right here, how can we use the plaza space that is remaining between the exchange building and the railroad to let that public space breathe still and be able to kind of get up to that space and not have this sort of, the risk, I think, of realigning the rail and consolidating to the east was that we ended up expanding the rail corridor by 60 feet, which means there's rail 60 feet closer to the front door of the livestock exchange building. So we make sure that's a really great space, and we're looking at how that ties to Betty Graham Drive. So as far as the cross section for this, and this isn't the design cross section, this was done for our conversations with Public Works, so it was just the dimensions at this point. So don't get too excited about this being so simple. But 12-foot lanes, one in each direction. Here we're not looking at those flexible lanes where they could be through lanes sometimes, so 7-foot managed curb lanes is the kind of state-of-art or state-of-the-art kind of terminology at this point. So they're parking lanes that are flexible that they can be used for loading and unloading and other things. Then we have an amenity zone is the kind of technical term if you look at how the city of Denver talks about these things. So that's where the plantings occur. It's where trash cans, bike racks, different things like that would be included. Then we have a sidewalk, a cycle track, so that's a two-way cycle track similar to what is on Brighton now, so it's that larger kind of pathway, as in addition to another sidewalk. So it's an 80-foot wide cross-section, and like we said, we're trying to supplement that with additional space outside of the right-of-way with small setbacks next to the buildings. So what we're looking at is a complete street type of space, which hopefully folks have thought about or heard about, but it's really accommodating all users on a street. So thinking about bicycles, thinking about pedestrian access, thinking about motorists and transportation, thinking about freight and these larger vehicles that may end up on here. Looking at stormwater capture and connections to water, so relationship to the river, to the riverfront open space, looking at public education opportunities along there, as well as the bigger vision for the campus, and really this being the front door, this raising the bar for design, and setting the example for high quality public realm.
Jay?
Yeah.
Oh.
Before we get too far away from your comment about that public space,
Sure.
I just wanted to make a comment.
The one by the Exchange Building?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment that I think that there should be consideration given to creating a really green space, almost like a grove of trees in certain areas.
Yeah.
Because I think that we tend to think of all these public spaces as hardscape and, you know, maybe with some trees around but in planters or whatever. But from my experience over time, for different plazas we've done, different surveys we've done, the people of Denver crave that a little bit of cluster of trees, some green grass, you know, just as a difference of a place to go spend time and be public. And so, you know, I would strongly consider that might be a perfect place to do something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
You're absolutely right. So if you remember when Dennis was here, from RT Dennis Ruba, and we were showing some of the kind of overall campus diagrams and like the turning movements and the utilities and things. It's an especially good point because we're pretty restricted in a lot of areas where we need hardscape because of the movement of animals or movement of semis and things like that. So in these places where you're not expecting any vehicles to be, like that Livestock Exchange Building Plaza, then you're absolutely right. We want to take advantage, and those need to be a kind of our green respites,
Really
you know, yeah. Great.
I
John?
have two things. The underpass,
Yeah.
Marion, that has to be widened.
Mhm.
Is it, do you have any?
It is currently being widened, actually. I don't know if you
To
walked over there. So the abutments that were put in when they put in the RTD bridge, they put in the abutments, but they didn't widen to
No,
those.
but
And
it
so
would be-
those being widened to those RTD
okay,
abutments. Yeah.
good. And along the lines that Ann mentioned, and actually reflects some of Mickey's concerns, the old Livestock Exchange Building,
Yeah.
that demonstrated to everybody at that time what it was about. That was the character of that building and the character of the old Denver Union Stockyards. And it was a grand old building at that time.
Yeah.
The Park Plaza, I think we can really do something, as Ann said, extraordinarily nice. I mean, make it a beautiful spot to complement the grand facade of that Exchange Building, even with the restricted space with the railroad consolidation. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I may bore you, but I'm going to say it and say it and say it. Benches. Benches throughout the area. Benches serve so many useful purposes. Benches in the Green Plaza are where it can cluster for public demonstrations, educational efforts, whatever. Wonderful opportunity for different designs and hope that, and as I mentioned before, in the 70s when we was working on the old Confluence Park that's now Shoemaker Plaza, Dana Crawford and I, we took, you know, benches have so many, and summer evenings for lovers, you know. I mean, we want to make this a cosmopolitan place, and not just the damn old stockyards anymore. It's going to be a grand, grand place with beautiful benches throughout. Clusters of them.
Great.
Bench clusters, uh-oh. Dave, can you top that, Dave?
Thank you. I agree with you, John. It's got to be magical, you know, and, all right. But now, what kind of, it's got to be magical, but at the same time, what kind of lighting? Are you going to have massive floodlights to light this up? Or is it going to be vintage, you know? And the buildings, what kind of design are they? Contemporary, vintage, you know, and, you know, that where people enjoy it, not just being shuttled in and shuttled out, you know, and where they want to stay and take time, and you know, something they'll remember. And also, you know, we're gonna have a lot of power boxes on these facilities, on all these streets, you know. And if you ever go up into Loveland, all of them are all painted and murals and all that type of stuff.
Yep.
You know, we need, you know, think we should look at that. And since the stock show started in 1909, the 1909 building, are we gonna keep that concept throughout the campus? Or is it gonna be like it is now? They just built a building here and there, whatever design came up, you know? Or are we gonna, you know, like John says, you know, make it romantic and magical and all that stuff, you know, where people are gonna remember it, you know? Anyway, that's all I got.
Oh, that's great. So to answer a couple of your questions, so we will be doing a deeper dive into the architectural character, through looking at those character areas, architectural character, and then beginning to talk about the design guidelines and standards. But the general concept, I have in a diagram coming up, but I won't jump forward. Basically is that it's called Character Area 10. It's a horrible name, but it is the area along Betty Cram Drive. And so in essence, the idea there is it's the greatest blend of some of the really rich historical kind of elements with the new West, right? So this is about research and education and kind of looking forward. And so we're working on, you know, looking at precedents. Well, how do we learn from? We're not going to, there's no place that can replicate or that we can replicate because this is so unique and we want it to be so unique. But what are those different design precedents? So we'll be bringing that back to you and getting your feedback on sort of what does that mean to you? Because John, you were talking about like what is the campus today? What have the neighborhoods been? What is it going to be moving forward? And we want that to be reflected in the architecture. And as far as the scale, this area in particular is going to be the most human scale. When you get up to the yards, there'll be pedestrian lighting as well, but you will have some pretty large, you know, not floodlights like it's going to light up the entire night sky. We're looking at sky pollution or light pollution and that sort of thing, and downward lighting and all of those different elements. But it will be a little more institutional scale as you move northward. But the most extreme would be in the yards. This will be very human scale through here. And we are absolutely thinking about the experience that we're trying to create here. So, concept for Betty Cram Drive. So these are a couple different ideas of how that might start to come together. So you can actually see the walkway here, kind of going from right to left in that cross section we just looked at. So sidewalk, cycle track, amenity zone, managed curb lane, the traffic lanes, and then the other side would be the amenity zone and sidewalk again, or managed curb lane, amenity zone, sidewalk. So the idea is using some of the historic materials integrated into here, maybe using some of the older pavers. Because of ADA requirements, we can't use those in the spaces where we would actually be walking or wheeling or whatever that is. But we can use that for accents and sort of integrating some of those features. Looking at the lighting and the scale as we just talked about, opportunities for signage. We're beginning to integrate in some of this imagery as well as figuring out locations for signage wayfinding and public art as well. And then, as we said, some of the earlier concepts for this were almost all paving. There were some trees and grates, but it was a very kind of downtown type of urban feel. And the initial feedback that we got from this group on some of our other streets, as well as from the partners, was that we needed this to be much softer and greener through here. So we're allowing, you know, this is nice because it actually allows for that kind of flex space. So a big event, bikes would have to go really slow, maybe you dismount, but you know, you have a lot of room for people walking through here. And same thing on the other side of the street. When we look at the kind of that major intersection, these are obviously sketches still at this point. We haven't gotten these into, we're still kind of wrestling with it, but we wanted to share with you. This is actually the alignment of the railroad right now. The Rock Island Railroad, one of the lines, comes right through kind of this piece, and then it kind of actually veers off like this and comes through. So we're thinking about, I know scale is difficult again, but this brown line is about the width of a rail line. And so the idea would be to use some of the rails like at Fort Collins, like Old Town Fort Collins, have those embedded right in the street, and maybe some could even be retained in the existing location.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is that the crossing across the river from the trestle?
This is Betty Cram Drive, and this is the south portion of National Western Drive. So this would be the water resource building right
Where's
here,
the railroad
animal
track?
health.
By the blue silo over there.
The blue silo is right down here.
Okay,
And
so
so
you're-
the cutoff is down here.
But the railroad crossover, the Jersey?
Yep, it'd be down kind of here.
Okay, good, okay. I had turned around then.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is north, this is the legacy building, animal health building,
Yes,
and then the water resources building.
I know where you're at now.
So really thinking about the pedestrian crossings here, the pedestrian experience, the intermingling of bikes and pedestrians potentially down here with that cycle track, how the public spaces, the plazas, both hardscape and landscape, can actually start to tie the buildings together also, so they don't have to be identical buildings. We don't want that. They need to be of the same kind of architectural character or kind of vocabulary, but the public space can really begin to link those together. So that's that concept here. This entry in both, the idea is that vehicles could go through there, but most of the time would not. So it would be service vehicles and things like that if they needed to kind of get through the campus this way. There would be bollards that could be taken down, or in this case, we're talking about like an older kind of cattle gate or something, at least reminiscent of that could be opened up. And then this concept, instead of the rail, is thinking about sort of more of a river form and connecting, our different programmatic elements with, say, the Water Resource Center, with the legacy building, the kind of the historic with the new west. But again, very special crossings, kind of making this a very safe pedestrian space. In this particular concept, we're actually talking about raising the intersection. So I don't know if you've heard of the term a tabletop intersection, but it basically, this small, very gradual ramps up before the crosswalks. And then the entire intersection is actually at the same grade as the sidewalk. So as a motorist, you feel like you're driving through the pedestrian space versus vice versa. So obviously we're working with the City and County of Denver with WSSA on, service vehicles, on snow removal, on, large trucks. But those are some of the early concepts for this major intersection. Yes, Eddie?
So,
Has a hard time going on there, Bill.
this is, when does this happen at this level of detail question, and I don't think it's down. But what I envision, realistically or not, is that you're doing the geometric aesthetic that would help with the preparation of the architecture and landscaping, but that we could possibly, at a key point, invite the city forester and the different arborists and talk more about the types of trees that are possible in modern times. And related to there are certain types of agriculturally producing trees too, that would have to be controlled and managed in certain ways. But I think there's I'm asking for us not to default to institutional catalogs of park trees. I'm asking to insert into the conversation right now a more dynamic and exciting exploration of what that might be.
Yeah.
And I want to get a ginkgo tree.
I'll look into getting you a ginkgo tree.
No, I'm looking into it, I've got that covered.
Okay.
But I mean, but the forester is the main thing, I shouldn't have deflected with that joke.
Yeah, the
But
health.
do you see what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah,
with the
absolutely. If you
expanded
remember the health
contract?
and wellness presentation that Meredith gave 2 meetings ago, we were actually talking about fruit-bearing trees, nut-bearing trees.
Yeah, it was
and
part
all
of the
that. So,
conversation.
yeah.
But I'm talking about the master plan idea
Yeah.
of integrating an ecology of trees.
Yeah,
And
we're
we've
working
got
on
a
the Regis
phenomenal
University
forester.
campus right now.
Pardon me?
And they actually have a class 2 arboretum
Yeah.
on the campus, which is pretty amazing. And so you can
So
get a
we
map
can
of the
throw all
campus,
those-
there's path, sort of lined out map where you can check out all the different trees. There's 9 champion trees on the campus.
So if you,
something
throw,
to aspire to.
I want to, okay, and I appreciate all the good examples. I'm wanting a mechanism where we have the conversation
Yeah.
and bring those to
Angie
the
made a
table.
note.
And I'm specifically proposing we meet our phenomenal forester director here. We
Yeah,
have
he's
a
awesome.
very amazing resource there.
Okay. Okay, so our last piece are looking at the very preliminary concepts for the plazas. So this is, again, I apologize that all the renderings right now have different bases. So now we're back to all white buildings, again, placeholder buildings. But again, it's meant to sort of give you a sense of scale of the space. So the dashed red lines here are actually the utility corridors and fire lane. It's about the same amount of space that's necessary through here. So we can't have any vertical obstructions in that space. But you can see, even in here, how many people can fit. I mean, this is a couple hundred people in this image right here, depending on if you were actually doing an event in the space, which we wouldn't anticipate because this is the entry to these different buildings, to the arena, so it's more of a queuing type of space. But on an off day, if you're going to do an event, you could easily fit over 1,000 people in the space. So that's along the lines of a farmer's market, things like that. So very flexible for that. Insert the model here. So this is jumping back out. We actually shared these last time, these working model diagrams. So placeholder buildings, but again gives you a sense, and placeholder bridge, John, I promise. But we didn't want to not show a bridge either. So, so this gives you kind of a sense of the scale again, and this actually starts to show this sort of rising up to where we have this kind of walkout basement type of treatment along a parking garage. So we're talking about this space here, and then throughout the rest of the slides, we're going to talk about this whole kind of piece through here. So tying all the way up to the stockyards. So this next one is showing maybe on an off day where there's a market or food trucks, thinking about something like in Civic Center East. So Jocelyn talked about the cafe type of space that might be in the Water Resource Building, but and then there will be concessions obviously in the arenas and things like that, but is there an opportunity to bring additional food and things, especially before the future phases are constructed, where we don't have a lot of the retail and kind of restaurants and shops that are kind of envisioned as part of the ag tech mixed use kind of development to the east of the tracks. But again, more for scaling than anything else, and also kind of re-emphasizing this need to keep this kind of central area clear. Here's the farmer's market kind of configuration with market tents and stalls. And then we're also thinking about daylight, which is really important, the sun kind of shaded piece of this. So to achieve what AE is talking about, we need to understand then where different species able to get the light that they need, the sunlight, including Homo sapiens. How are they fitting into this too? And so there's certain times, this is January 16th, 4 p.m. Most of that plaza space is actually in shade with the exception of kind of the space right here outside of the Legacy building. 9 a.m. it's all in shade, that's actually midsummer at 9 a.m. So the scale of the buildings is they're casting pretty big shadows. So we're going to continue kind of bringing this back as we think about the different public spaces and what that experience is like without sun. Because to your point, I think Coloradans seek shade certain times of the year, and they're seeking sun other times of the year. So we want to be cognizant of that.
Just out of curiosity, can you land a hot air balloon? Does that have the trigonometry access to?
In this particular plaza?
Land?
I know I couldn't. Maybe there's someone
Launch a
still
land.
up to.
No, I mean seriously, I'm
definitely could do it in the
semi-serious. I think that'd be
stockyards.
spectacular.
In the stockyards, you
You
absolutely
could over, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put it on our fun and games
Yeah, that'd be
future.
super cool.
Well, I know these are basically gray, black, and white, but what about some green and some color? I mean, at least if we look at it again, I mean, I don't see much color in any of the buildings or any of the sidewalks. It all is kind of beige and gray, and I think that color could do a lot, and I think on that plaza, to have some trees or to have some green or to break it
benches.
up would make a big difference rather than having this solid concrete plaza.
Yeah, so thank you for the segue. I'll pay you $20 after the meeting. So this is one of the preliminary ideas for the plazas. So this is to reorient. I know we're jumping around in scale and angle and everything. So this is Betty Cream Drive here. This is National Western Drive. You're just catching the river over here in the corner. So this is focused on just this piece. So to your point, Mickey, we can show color and things on the building, other buildings as well and other spaces, but we're trying to make kind of the area that we're focused on pop. And so the idea with this particular concept is kind of this idea of the pivot that we were talking about before, which has two meanings to our team. So one is thinking about the actual physical pivot. That was, part of it was because of the site planning, kind of pivoting through the space and where different sort of pathways are coming together potentially through here. And so these become major kind of pivot points, they're decision points. But the other aspect of pivot is adaptation, right? So you're pivoting because the circumstances around you have changed. And so what we want to do is start to think about the pivoting and how we're, if you think about the bigger vision for the campus and solving the food shortage that we will have and feeding 9 billion people by 2050 potentially. There's all, and water, right? Water Resource Center, and how we're using water effectively in all these different means, urban environments, agricultural environments. This is about solving, it's about pivoting, it's about adaptation, which ties the Old West to the New West, to the urban, to the rural, agricultural. And so this pivot concept, and in both of them we're trying to achieve this, but in this one it does it through sort of these kind of punctuation marks kind of through here. So you end up with the intersection of Betty Cram Drive and National Western Drive, that entry plaza being kind of the next kind of punctuation mark and sort of the pivot, the physical pivot that occurs here. The Armor Building being one of those major kind of breadcrumbs along the way. And then the event center and the plaza space adjacent to the event center. Depending on the scale of the event, you could use all 20 acres of the stockyards. But if you recall when Dennis was here, and I think I might have reminded folks during our last presentation, this space right here can accommodate well over 2,000 people for an event, if you're having a concert or something like that. So yes, you could expand this way, you could expand this way, you could expand this way. But this, because of all the other circulation that would be happening during maybe concurrent events, we're thinking as the major kind of event space up in the yards year-round, where you do the higher quality materials, the higher finishes, the landscaping, all the lighting would be really pedestrian scaled. Whereas as you move northward, it'd be a little bit more of a, not a blank slate by any means, but you wouldn't have as much detail and kind of human scaling occurring. Yeah.
So I have a question, just wondering if you've thought about this. So conflict of uses. So if you have like a big event going on in an open public space, is there anything that's adjacent that's going to have an issue with the noise that's created from that public space? So that could be at the event center. I don't know. At the event center, I don't know if that equestrian area to the north, if you're having a raucous crowd, if there's animals up there, is that like a problem? And then also down below at the entry, where you were showing the food trucks and all of that, are there going to be any issues with what's going on inside the Legacy building or, the animal hospital? I mean, the only reason why I asked that question is when we did Denver Union Station, we had anticipated the plaza being a very active program place.
Right.
And as it turned out, the hotel had issues with that. So it's not as programmed as it normally would be. Now, I love the hotel, and I think it's pretty active, so it probably isn't suffering for that. But it's something to think about now, especially as people are designing their buildings. If there's going to be a sensitive to noise area within a building, it should probably orient itself in a way that if there is noise going on in the public spaces, that it's not going to be disturbed by it.
Yeah, and that's one of your earlier questions. I'm not going to say that they're at odds, but it's an interesting balance. So active uses, right? Like exposing the equestrian program or aspects of that in the animal health facility, or even small animals and exposing that, and then having, as you said, maybe larger, louder events in this space might be in conflict. So We are absolutely doing this. So the first step in that was the programming study, the public space programming study. We're talking about different events and where they were appropriate. Part of that was based on the adjacencies. The user experience piece, we're trying to kind of understand more nuance on that. And then the design guidelines, and they're going to have to get out at that as well. But the individual design teams, it's definitely something to consider. And then the authority in programming the overall campus will have to be thinking about that too. Both what they're programming, you know, like maybe they program this and then they program something in this space, and do those work together? But also those 365-day-a-year uses, excuse me. Yeah.
So I've had an ongoing question, I wasn't sure where it would surface, and I'd like to surface it now, which is, I'd really like this project to bring in the best materials scientists in the world to inform the architectural and the flexibility decisions. Case in point, there are some outrageous innovations coming with materials that are movable sound barrier materials that are very manageable. And it creates a versatility that is phenomenal, and it is something that is very important as cities become more dense. And I've been wondering about this for a long time, because it's a whole nother arena, and I keep waiting for it to be mentioned. I don't know the level of expertise. Sometimes I think, and I'm not saying this about you guys, but I think a lot of times people Google things as consultants and come up with things that are pretty good, but we can all do that. But there's another way to get 50 years ahead.
Yeah, I'm not the
by,
acoustical expert by any means.
But what I'm saying is that we need to bring that in at a point where we still have a chance to make decisions. And it's the same thing as having a lead qualification, you know, like like your group, Ann, it's a platinum, you make platinum buildings. That's platinum, I don't know if that's a classification or but that's because somebody 15 years before that building was built, or maybe longer, became conversant in what was going to arrive at the point that, and architectural decisions and engineering decisions are made. So I'm asking for that to be on the list of elevated research in the design.
Absolutely. Yeah, in the stuff that you're going to see us present in this meeting, I would say, like these types of drawings, that won't be reflected, obviously, and I know you know that. But the design guidelines and standards, absolutely. We need to be incorporating sustainability in the sound.
But there are decisions that are, let me just, but I know it's not going to be reflected in detail. That's why I've been holding off.
Yeah.
But it is reflected in the placemaking. It's just like deciding what benches, what trees. There are things that you can do that can even increase, in some sense, the utilization by knowing that you can prevent a problem, like what Ann was talking about. That doesn't, if you default to, well, we can only do this because that's a legitimate problem, rather than let's bring in more of a facility control flexibility, like these sound barriers. So what I'm saying is we inadvertently limit the creativity of the utilitarian engineering if we don't have material sciences at their very best and innovative in the very early discussion changes. So I'm saying I think they should be, research having to do with hitting that apex of potential with what's available and coming when we, I want to hit that. I want that to be in the design conversation now.
Well, I'm going to suggest a different approach. It just seems to me that it's very linear around in terms of the design. I mean, to me, it doesn't reflect anything really rural. It doesn't reflect the mystery of some trails going through. And I realize it's in an early stage, but looking at that, it seems like you would like to explore, you'd like to have something along the way, whether it's, a small kind of log cabin thing that they serve things. I'm not suggesting that's it, but I mean, if you look at these two photos, the two men with the horse, once you put the green in there and a little bit of nature, it's a whole different feeling than the picture next to it, which is black and white. And I realize we're talking mostly black and white, but still, I see pretty much straight lines circles or octagon kind of things. I think it needs to have a little more fluidity and a little more fun and a little more mystery than at least what I'm seeing today.
Okay. Yeah, those are great comments. Thank you.
I just want to quickly say, I agree with everything 100% that Mickey just said. Nothing that he said is in contradiction to what I was saying, but I do think that can be directly attached to the actual design that we're looking at. Because even that, you can create a pastoral control of sound through elegant, disguised in nature sound materials with all kinds of, the application holds, and Mickey's talking about a very important, larger picture of the entire design that you have up there. I think that you're absolutely right.
Now, are they gonna, or are you guys gonna do any kind of roundabouts on the intersections or any of that type of stuff?
We weren't anticipating that, no.
You're not? I mean, that adds to it. You can put, you know, a lot of things. I mean, it can be kind of be a pain in the butt too, but.
Part of the issue is the space constraint on this part of the campus. So we would need larger intersections to accommodate a roundabout here, which would then eat into the development sites for the legacy building and the CSU buildings. But we can definitely like we have templates for roundabouts, right? Like how much space they take up once you have the sidewalks and the plantings and everything. So we can definitely lay those on there and see how they're fitting, for sure. Okay, so we have one more concept here. Still a lot of straight lines. We do have one large curve. So the idea here was actually sort of providing a trail kind of connection through here. And that then obviously tying to the different facilities, but also looking at sort of educational and interpretive opportunities along here. This area right here, between the equestrian arena, large equestrian arena, this is actually the outdoor warm-up space. So it's covered, but it's actually open air. So that's actually a pretty neat kind of potentially active edge when there's actually horses here. But this edge of the livestock hall, it's going to be almost entirely paved. We're looking at, can we do some small plantings kind of in between the doors, but there's a door like a large door for loading, unloading, at every one of these aisles. I don't know if you can see that, but these are aisles kind of coming out here, so there's door. And so semis need to be able to back up to that. So it's similar to this building, the Hall of Education, sort of along the edge over here during stock show, where you have all the folks backed up. There's a lot of loading, unloading. They're pushing waste out here, things like that. So
all different colored doors, right?
That potentially, sure. Yeah, we can look at all different colors. So the real opportunity is along the arena, and then kind of tying to this warm-up space where we could create that kind of richer pedestrian experience. Along this, the constraints really are, I guess, in essence, it's the utilities, because this becomes tighter through here. So the utilities provide some of that. So the ability to green that up is kind of in this piece here, looking at planting opportunities here, and then perhaps if we can keep the fire lane intact, doing some plantings in this section here. Up by the armor building, there's much more opportunity because you're actually between the two barns. So there's the barn here and then barn here. So these are kind of big loading, unloading areas. So this becomes that opportunity for, not a log cabin, it'll be the armory admin building, but that building that can be programmed, it can be landscaped, you can have different levels, different interpretive features here. And then we're really looking at this passage here. So like we said, we really want to get to a point where we can do this also, kind of go down and go through the garage. So this is an important connection, but then we also want this to be a great connection too. So this would be landscaped, lit with pedestrian lighting, and then this being that sort of higher quality material public space where you could do different types of events.
So Jay,
Yeah.
can you talk about semis, loading and unloading on that west side?
Yeah.
So when does that happen? I mean, and do you have like...
It would happen for our rock and mineral shows potentially. Usually those would be smaller box trucks that people are bringing in, but it's a lot of material.
Yeah, so how does that
it could
go?
happen for, well, definitely for any livestock show, stock show or otherwise.
How does that interface with people being in that area as well? I mean, how are you going to control people being safe when you've got semis backing in and coming out?
So it's going to be pretty similar to the campus today. It'd be similar to some areas around the Pepsi Center as well. Mile High is like that as well. So basically we need to design, and this is starting to convey it just super high conceptual level, but we need to communicate with the design that this is the pedestrian space. But we won't be doing a fence down that or anything like that. It would be, you would be able to wander over by the semis if you were in this space. Pretty similar to, you know, the stock show experience today, but there's other types of events that are like that too. Yeah, I mean, it's a great concern. It's one of the things that we grapple with, honestly, as a design team daily, because one of the amazing things about the campus today, not just for stock show but other events, is that there's this interesting mingling of front of house and back of house that is, it's part of the charm, I think, of the experience here. But we also want to think about safety and, you know, with animals, with large vehicles, and pedestrians walking around. So, yeah, I'm glad that you highlighted it. It's something we're definitely cognizant of. Okay, I think, yes. So these are some of the examples of something you'll see in the drawings and imagery moving forward. None of these specifically, these are photo examples from other places, but the idea of reusing pieces of the campus that exist today, the pens, some of the water containers. This is an example of gears, this is rails here. So bringing all these different pieces in, thinking about the Colorado landscape and how are we making that a really authentic sort of reflection of the larger region and state, looking at opportunities for planting and growing food. Some of that being movable, because we know that we have these constraints for probably our most constrained event as far as what can happen on the ground plane in the public space is stock show. But we don't want to say, oh, well, stock show is using 20 acres of the yard, so it's just going to be one big concrete open space. So are there movable elements that we could bring in? And we're actually, and we just initiated a conversation with CSU at our last meeting about could that actually serve a research function? And maybe the research is around actually moving, you know, growing areas. Whereas they had an instance with the stadium, I think they had to delay the schedule because there were some research gardens or something, right, in the space.
There were research.
But then looking at different ways that we can do stencil art, bringing in color, looking at the ground plane, looking at furnishings. I don't know that benches are actually called out in this one, so I will add them, John. So we'll have a lot of different types of benches, clusters of benches.
Jay, sorry, I'm making a lot of comments tonight.
Here you go,
That's
Ann.
great.
I just wanted to let you know that on our site, we salvaged a whole bunch of old rail that went down Lincoop Street and really don't have a home for it, and our contractor is saying, like, decide what to do with this because we need to move it or throw it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, it's an opportunity if there's a need for any salvaged rail.
Yeah.
We've got some.
That's great. Yeah, we'll have quite a bit from the Rock Island Railroad, but depending on how much gets integrated, maybe it's in better condition, maybe we can't use it.
Talk to
Oh,
Tom.
okay, so then, yeah, maybe
Anybody wants it.
we'll talk to you, yeah. The Rock Island Railroad owns the rail that I was just referring to, so maybe this is an easier path to integrate a rail. One thing on the benches while I was thinking about it, and this kind of reuse of pieces of the site, I know this is jumping way back here, but this is, it's really hard to see from your seats probably. This was one of the sort of earlier ideas that we had. So this is actually one of the, it's a model of course, but it's the dimensions of the catwalk supports. So the existing catwalk structurally will be replaced, right? And so the idea of reusing some of those materials. So this is one of the tops. So the catwalk would be sitting here on this. So perhaps using those supports and converting those to benches that can be used throughout the site. And so we're starting to look at those specific opportunities of how to use some of the existing site and character and patina that's here and this, you know, brand new build, and how do we still make it feel like a place and really authentic. So that is actually the end of the presentation. Next steps, we're finishing the user experience questionnaire and interviews, and then drafting this user experience report. We're refining these individual concepts, and admittedly, I think you saw today, they're in various forms. Some have color, some don't, some are sort of digitally done, some are hand sketched. So we're using those to get this preliminary round of feedback before we do one larger cohesive concept. And so using CAC partner and community input for that, developing a cohesive public space strategy from that, and then developing our design guidelines and standards. So we'll be coming back for that. And I did want to mention, and I've said it a couple times, but just something to keep in mind, is the design guidelines and standards, or standards and guidelines is the way the city says it, they're for the entire campus. So it's not just phase 1 and 2, John, just west of the tracks, it's also the entire triangle, the area down by the Coliseum. So we get to set a lot of direction with those. And not that they couldn't be amended or something at some point, but it's a pretty important piece of the future development as well. So that's all I had for tonight. Any other comments? Any announcements?
I just have a real quick,
Yeah.
I just want to make one connection. I just want to propose one, expand the fields, the sphere of influence. On the, and I was going to reference the last sentence on that last slide, and design guidance and standards for the entire campus. We have a bridge going over at East 47th Avenue in New York that is a beloved advocacy from within the neighborhood, much coming out of the Swansea Elementary School. Hundreds of people are on a daily basis, literally, aware of that, and it's the #1 general obligation bond priority, largely because of that. That is just a rock skip away from the National Western and campus. Building on what John was saying about the connecting bridges between Elyria and Globeville that includes the National Western, I really would ask that somehow in this we start developing an awareness of the potential of a very, very serious and empathetic and creative collaboration with that bridge, with all of these standards, and within the neighborhoods that are struggling with the whole architectural and the maintaining the character of the neighborhoods. And that's can be seen as very separate, but that's an access point of lots of traffic, foot traffic, to and from the National Western, no question about it. So I just want to put that here. I don't know what the timing is on it, but I would ask all of us, all the design teams, to be thinking about that, because we're going to need to leverage, we need the help of the National Western to leverage the creativity of that bridge, because there is some danger it's going to default to the mundane material. No, it's going to be very utilitarian, but I'm talking about design. It's going to default to the materials that are too ubiquitous already on these bridges. I'd like to more start resembling what John is talking about. So anyway, it's a potential, and it would really create, if we have some design continuity flowing into the neighborhoods with from the National Western in these arenas, we would be doing something that I think can be very specifically listed as a community benefit. So I want to put that in the mix.
Great. Oops. Any other comments from anyone? Okay. So thank you, everybody. We started out with a small group and then we grew. It was pretty amazing. It was fantastic. So I just want to do a couple of housekeeping items. Actually, it's more than a couple. So based on some discussion that originated with Dave Oletsky, is that he's been asking for a tour of the campus for a long time, and we know that the weather's going to be changing soon. So Maria and I had a conversation and decided that it would be great to we'll skip the September 27th meeting, we'll cancel that, and we're planning a campus tour followed by a picnic on October 6th, and we're hoping to start around 10:30 in the morning with the tour, which will be the campus but also neighborhood related as well, because that's important. We want to touch on the parks and the connections and all of those things. Chances are actually definitely our picnic will not be on the National Western Center campus. It will be off the campus, so that allows us a little more flexibility in terms of ordering food and whatnot. And so we're looking to find a sponsor for that event. We'll let you know about that soon. Maria's making a call. So that'll be no meeting September 27th, then October 6th at 10:30 we'll have our meeting. That will be a tour, and we'll do a picnic, and we'll do, maybe if there's some placemaking there, a short activity, but the meeting's not going to be a long meeting.
What's being preempted in the meeting agenda for that?
Um,
And I support the tour, by the way.
Yeah, no,
But
I.
I'm a little concerned about completely.
It means we're gonna have to do some catch-up on placemaking, I think. But really, as we looked at our schedule, there are some topics that we'll be able to, and I can't think of them right now, that we'll be able to pick up, but I don't think we're missing out on any critical, like, authority to CAC things at all. The biggest thing that is my next agenda item is that over the next week and then into the following week, there have been 4 sessions planned with Brad Buchanan. That's here. This will be a two-sided, we're getting it translated into Spanish so that we can provide it to the schools and in other locations as well. We'll also be sharing it via all of the networks, and we're gonna, it's not just GES, but we're gonna share it with council people so that, we're basing 3 of the meetings in the Globeville area, Swansea area, but that's not to say that just GES people could come. These are public events, and we're gonna do outreach to, through the other council people as well to get the message out around the city. So take a look at those. I'm gonna send a follow-up email tomorrow with all these dates, kind of just with the schedule. Because we are gonna end up having, I'm guessing, at least one more special session in October for placemaking. And we may need another special session, or we may do a combined special session that will involve talking about the triangle and the kind of the RFP or RFQ that will be going out for the triangle. So a busy fall, and it's already the middle of September. So any questions on any of those items?
Yeah.
Yes, sir?
Why isn't Brad coming to this meeting? And basically, we asking questions and he making a presentation.
So to schedule all of the meetings, he is going to be with us on October 6th, and we can certainly ask him questions there. But since we're not having the September 27th meeting, which would have come after the authority meeting that would have been earlier in the day, we just decided to plan these events, and you can come to any of those, and we're hoping that CAC and authority members show up at these sessions with Brad. So, and there's also the opportunity to have individual meetings with him as well. So it was just hard in this period of time from last authority meeting to the next authority meeting to get it all in, and so I think that those 4 events will give ample time for folks to present and ask questions.
When does the authority vote?
They will consider the finalist, I believe, well, not I believe, but at their next authority meeting, which will be September 27th at 9:30 in the morning. So they were talking about a shorter timeline, and we said, look, it's just impossible to have time for input in like a couple of weeks. So we asked them to do it on the 27th.
What?
So.
On the lighter side,
Yes?
on the October 6th
Yes, sir?
tour, and you said a picnic,
Yes?
and that's gonna be a Oktoberfest type, a picnic with a house roll.
Oh, well, we're going to be off campus. I'm understanding what you're saying. I understand. We'll have to, yes, sir, we'll work on that. Okay?
When you say you're seeking a sponsor, is that to pay for it, or are you?
To help fund the picnic.
But you're open to vendor suggestions?
Oh, yeah,
for food? I
absolutely.
just want to put that out to people,
Yeah.
because I don't want to default to the usual.
Oh, no. What we would love to do is use somebody from the neighborhood.
Well, I'm
yeah.
thinking, but it's even bigger than that.
Okay, yeah.
Just a thing to point out also, October 6th is our annual pet wellness clinic at First Point.
Okay.
So CSU may or may not be able to come on that tour, but you guys could come by First Point.
Somebody from CSU could come.
What time?
Absolutely.
It runs, I don't remember exactly when it starts, but it's all day.
Okay.
Because we just do about 70 families.
Great, so maybe that'll be a great stop along the way, just on.
Well, it'd be a little overwhelming, we don't want to get in the way of
No,
them
Right.
doing their
Is
business.
there a high percentage of, there are a lot of folks that come are from Denver, right?
The folks who come
for the, to bring their pets, et
to,
cetera?
yeah, I think they almost all are. I'm
Okay,
not
so
sure.
the reason I ask is I really think we should flyer that to invite them over to the picnic.
Oh,
And from the
That'd be a
public.
great idea. Sure.
I mean, I don't know if people
For the
want to
morning
do that. I mean, it might
appointments,
overwhelm it a little bit, but
Right.
we really need
Let's talk
to,
about how we can coordinate.
yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yep.
yeah.
I don't wanna mess with the flow of that day that you have.
Well, it's just
Yeah,
like-
you're right. Yeah,
But
okay,
after they're done,
That's what I'm saying.
great. Other questions, comments?
We had these placemaking questionnaires, and
Uh-huh.
basically, if we haven't given them to you tonight, what's the procedure?
So there's a Survey Monkey one still, right? Is that still
Yep, there is a
Yeah.
link if you want to do it just online, or if you want to fill it out, you can just send it to me, either one.
Yeah, or you could take a picture and send it to Liz,
Yep,
if that's okay.
yeah, either of those, so, okay. Do you have a deadline that you want these by?
Last week.
The end of this
Within a
week?
week of, a week from now.
We'd like to get them by Friday and Monday at the latest. How's that?
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else? All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.